got the wheels off, so let me show you what this Buick has for suspension. So in the rear, we've got a enclosed drive shaft running all the way up to the transmission with a pivot. You see that up in there? Kind of a different setup. They got away from this in the 50s on most vehicles. I think 5960 Buick is the last GM car that still ran this type of setup. But should work out well for our needs. They tend to articulate really well. All we have locating the axle is this nice long panhard bar, and then we've got these, I'd call them radius rods. I don't know what you actually call them, but they basically sort of center up the axle, allow it to flex as you go over bumps and all that. And then we've just got some big old coil springs, and someone at some point added coils over some shocks. So we're going to be eliminating that, obviously. But yeah, should be easy enough to put a bag in place of these coils and leave the rest pretty much alone. Pull the bump stops, double check that nothing binds. Probably going to have to cut off exhaust, but that's all right because it's kind of rough looking anyway. So we'll just cut it right where it comes out of the frame here and make sure it's not in the way of anything. Moving up front, we've got another holdover from a bygone era. We've got kingpins instead of ball joints. And we've got some nice little spring pockets. We'll definitely have to cut those out to get some more clearance for a bag, but not too bad. All in all, should go together pretty easily. Car's pretty solid and clean overall. So we'll get to disassembling and we'll check back in just a bit. All right, we've got the front suspension disassembled. Rick is working on the rear suspension. And I've got the spring pockets marked out for cutting. We're going to try to fit a 7-inch Slam Specialties bag up in here. I'm not sure if there's enough room between the edges of the internal spring pocket to clear it, but we're going to shoot for that. We'll just cut the outside of the frame right to the edges and up and try and give it the best chance possible. And then we'll have a look once the cutting's done. If a 6 is all that'll fit, then that's what we'll run, but we're going to shoot for a 7. So stay tuned. I'll get this cut and we'll see what it looks like. Off the shop. Bring it out the motor, but for now we'll just cut it. This should work out right. All this should clear just fine. So,
Bump stops are doing like both sides too.
yeah.
So
At least that didn't fight.
no.
So cool. All right. We'll check back in tomorrow. Oh. Hi. We're going to check back in tomorrow. It's raining, so we're going to go hang out by the fireplace. All right, with the coil springs and shocks and everything out of the way in the rear, let me show you what the plan is. Kind of had to scratch our heads a little bit. It's a little different from some of the other GM vehicles that we work on, but that's why we bring these things in, is to make it easier for the next guy. So up top, the coil spring was held in with a bolt that went up into the spring pocket. What we're going to do is use looks like 1/2-inch thread probably. So rather than drilling this out and running a nut on top, we're going to go with a smaller piece of all thread. So we'll go 3/8, so it'll just fit right up through that hole. We'll drill up until we get into the interior floor, because there's really no room between the frame and the body. With the body on the frame, there's no good way to get up there to put the nut on the top there. So from the trunk, then we'll back drill with a larger hole, large enough to get a socket onto the nut. And then we'll just make that all thread to where it sits flush with the floor, so you can just cap that real easily. So that should take care of the upper cup. Down here, let me tilt this down. Let's see how this goes. There we go. All right. So the lower coil mount is a bolt sticking up out of this pad, and you can see, maybe you can see, can't really see. Basically, there's no way to get that bolt out without cutting this pad off and then re-welding it. We don't want to do that, and neither do any of our customers. So what we're going to do instead is grind this off flush, center just one of our standard round bag plates over this, and we'll drill 2 holes, one there and one there. It'll be a little close to the edge, but we use large washers to kind of spread that load. And really, there's not a lot of shear force on those bolts. It's just sort of to hold everything in location. The weight of the car is going to kind of keep everything centered up where it needs to be. So that should make the lower mount pretty easy. The only other thing we have to do is when this axle is jacked all the way up with the bump stops removed, this brake line wants to hit the frame just before the axle does. So I'm going to take a grinder and just grind a little channel into the frame rail where it hits, and just put a little slit just for that brake line to sneak up into. The other side is fine. Passenger side is not a problem. Just the driver, sits. It's like 1/8 of an inch before the axle hits the frame. But if you don't do that, you'll either flatten your brake line or break it. And either way, you're not going to have a working brake on the left rear wheel. So we don't want that. But yeah, that's about it for the rear. It should be pretty straightforward. The axle travels in a nice, decent arc. So we'll have about, give or take, 8 inches of travel in the rear. And without having a skirted rear, that's enough to get the wheel on and off, and should give him, plenty of ride height. All right, so we cut that bolt off and ground everything nice and flat. And then I just took one of our lower cup plates, centered it up on here, and then just hit it with some spray paint so it leaves the 2 bolt hole locations for me to drill through. Did the same over here. So I'm going to let that paint dry a little bit, and then I'll center punch those holes to mark them, and then we'll get them drilled. And then lower should be ready to go. I've got some upper bag cups cooling off to go up in there. Let me tilt this up. There we go. Just go up in. Jeez. No light under here. Up in the spring pockets. So once that's done, we'll get that drilled out and go up top and back drill it, and we should be able to bolt the cups in today. All right, we've got the rear just about ready to install. Let me tilt this down and I'll show you the axle pads. So we've got the holes drilled for the bags and lower plates on both sides. We've got the shocks back in supporting the axle. I will put the shock part number in the video description. They're for a like 89 Dodge front wheel drive, like a Shadow or whatever. So they've got the collapsed length we need. So I'll give you the KYB part number for those. We still need to drop the car down now that the shocks are on and the axle can be supported by those. We can drill the spring pockets out the rest of the way for the airlines and for the nuts and washers up top. So we're going to take a hole saw inside the trunk to get that access. We started routing airlines from front to back. We're just following brake lines, fuel lines, all that good stuff. And then bags and brackets are in on the front. That side's collapsed. I'll show you this side. Here we go. So it's a little dark. Let me grab a light. Hang on. There we go. So now you should be able to see. So the bags have plenty of clearance. We've got the lower mounts bolted in through the original shock mounts. And then the upper cup is just up in the original spring mounting location with some all thread holding it in position. So everything clears like it should. One thing that we're not doing on this car that you may want to do to get an extra little bit of drop is right here you could notch the battery tray on this side and cut the inner wheel well on the other side for a little extra clearance on the upper arm. So it might get you a little bit more drop. We're going to set these brackets to account for that extra little bit of drop because it still gets enough lift to totally top out the suspension. So yeah, we're setting you up for success. If you want to do the extra cutting, it's there. Yeah, we'll get the wiring and airline routed, and I'll check back in just a bit. All right, under the hood, we just cleaned up the wiring a little bit. The positive terminal was a little rough looking, and the wire was pretty badly corroded. So we just went ahead and replaced that for him. It only goes over to a little junction right there. And that putting a new terminal on let us get a dedicated wire running over to the breaker on the wheel well. So then that runs back to the trunk. Otherwise, under here you can just barely see we've got the airline coming out of the spring pocket, and we put a little bit of heat reflective sleeve over that. I think that stuff is made for like probably transmission cables and maybe plug wires or whatever. It's made by DEI. It was like $14 for a 3-foot length. So makes sense. Just kind of if anything's going to be close to the exhaust, we kind of want to make sure nothing happens to it. Other than that, that's pretty much it under the hood. Let me go up with the car and I'll show you some stuff underneath. All right, up front, you can see we've got the bag brackets and we made some shock brackets. After getting around to doing the shocks, which is sort of the last part of the puzzle on the front end, I realized it'd probably be smarter just to integrate, rather than making a separate cup that goes in the factory spring location on the lower, and then making this plate that adapts onto the front of that plate. For production, we're just going to make one big plate, kind of like our 59 and 60 Buick kits, that'll replace the whole lower spring pocket, have the bag bracket built in, and then also have this extension over for the lower shock mount. So it'll be a little easier for you guys, less pieces, and a little easier for production as well. The upper shock bracket, well, you're not going to be able to see that really, but just trust us. There's one in there, and it goes up and on the inside of the frame, and just sort of nestles right next to the fans and radiator and everything. So should be decent. Doesn't limit our steering travel any. Lets you keep the sway bar, all that good stuff. So pretty much dialed up there. Let me walk to the back, and I think we already showed you most of this, but it is all set to go. Shocks are in, bags are in, wiring, plumbing's all run, tied up, away from all moving parts and everything. So I think we should be ready to drop this thing on the ground and pull it out and see what we've got. All right, with the suspension installed and the airlines run into the trunk, now it's time for us to make the panel that everything's going to be mounted on. Customer didn't want anything super crazy in the trunk, just kind of keeping things simple. So we're going to get we picked up some 1/2-inch plywood, and I'm going to mount the tank, the manifold, and the air compressor to that. So I measured up while I was in there running the airlines in, and we've got 36-inch wide, 14-inch deep to sit right under the package tray behind the seat. So I've got that marked out. I've got my wood cutting blade back on the circular saw, and we're going to go ahead and cut this out, and then we'll show you how we're going to lay it out. All right, so board is cut out, and we've got all of our components mounted on it, or at least laid out on it. So we've got a Slam Specialties 8C manifold. We've got a Vire 485 compressor and an airlift polished aluminum tank. I went ahead and put all the fittings on the back side of the tank, so this will be facing the back seat, so you won't see any of this stuff. Pressure switch will be hidden away. Solenoid hidden sort of to the back, but still accessible if you need to get to it. And then we'll run the rest of the wiring out and down from here. So I went ahead and centered the air tank on the board and drilled those mounting holes, and then put the compressor and the manifold in line with the feet and an inch back from the face of the board. So it should look pretty symmetrical and even, and just clean and sanitary. Nothing crazy, but you know, we want it to look good and not messy when he does pop the trunk. So I've got all the holes drilled. Now I'm going to take this board over and put some carpet on it, and then we can mount all these components. And I've got to Teflon tape all of the fittings and everything for the tank, and then it should be ready to drop into the car. All right, that's starting to look like something. So we just laid down some basic automotive carpet and cut the holes back through for mounting everything. And there we have it. So we'll finish plumbing this out and get it in the trunk, and then we are on the home stretch with this thing. So we had some pretty significant weather come through. Customer ended up taking an extra week to come get the car, and it got parked off to the side for a bit. So I didn't take the opportunity to film a drive around the block or a follow-up, you know, kind of conclusion video. So I'll just voice over this. Car rides great, gets plenty of lift, sits down lower than I expected really for not having the drop knuckles and not doing the cutting of the front wheel wells. So fortunately the customer seems super happy with the result. That's what really matters. We'll have this kit up on our website real soon. I just finished the layout of all the parts for the front brackets. So as soon as those come in from the laser cutter, we'll weld a set up, get some photography, and get that live on the site. And I'll update the description down below with those part numbers and everything. Anyway, as always, thanks so much for watching and supporting the channel and supporting our business. This was a fun one, you know, nice to get away from Cadillacs every now and then and try something new. So thanks as always. We'll see you next time.